NacroVMX here with another rant. I want to talk about something that's bugged me for a long time, and that is video game series that change consoles too often. And there's one series in particular I'm going to talk about. But before I get into that, I want to talk about what exactly I mean by this. I mean, obviously, there's a such thing as progress, and eventually systems die out and you have to get new ones. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because how long are you going to play your NES? You're eventually going to want the better one with, the better graphics and sound and gameplay. Now, with something like, well, let's say Super Mario or Legend of Zelda, they're always going to be on the Nintendo system. And you knew, back then that Sonic was always going to be on the Sega systems, although that's not true anymore. But with third-party games, it's not so different. And when you get attached to a certain series and you wind up having the wrong system, that can really piss you off. I mean, for example, Final Fantasy was always on the Nintendo systems. It was on the NES, it was on the Super NES, and it was on the Game Boy. And then suddenly it was on PlayStation. Now, they didn't make that decision lightly. They were actually working on Final Fantasy VII as a game that was going to be on the Nintendo 64. But then Squaresoft decided that they couldn't really do what they wanted to do on the N64 and that the PlayStation was the better choice. Now, that probably pissed off a couple of people who were Final Fantasy fans who always bought Nintendo consoles because Final Fantasy was always on the Nintendo. One series that's been pretty good with this is Mega Man. Mega Man it was on the Nintendo, it was on the Game Boy, it was on the Super NES. I mean, and it pretty much sticks to one system for a while, before moving on to another. And, but the series that I really want to talk about is Castlevania. Castlevania bugs the shit out of me, and I'll tell you why. It switches systems way, way too often. I mean, it sucks. It's bad enough when one of your favorite series goes to a system and you back the wrong horse. But what if you back the right horse, but still they release a completely different game on another system? Why does Konami feel the need to do this? I mean, it started off so simple. The first three games, Castlevania, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, well, the first two games, they were on the NES. There was another game called Vampire Killer that was on a different system, the MSX home computer. Now, I don't worry about that too much, because the game kind of sucks, and it came out only in Japan. But what about the Japanese? I mean, what about these kids that like Castlevania, and then Vampire Killer came out, and they couldn't play it on their Famicom? Why did they do that? And then Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest comes out on the NES or Famicom. They made an arcade game, but let's face it, you're not buying arcade games. So, okay, I mean, other than that one little thing on the MSX, it's pretty much an NES series, right? I mean, then they released one on the Game Boy, the Castlevania Adventure. Well, I guess that makes sense. It was the only really viable handheld at the time in 1989. I mean, the Game Gear was around, but, if you were a Nintendo fan, you probably had a Game Boy. And the Game Boy did come first. So, okay, that's acceptable. And then Castlevania 3 comes out. That's fine. Then Castlevania 4 comes out on the Super NES. So it's still, pretty much a Nintendo series. They've released every game on Nintendo that's come out in America anyway. Then they do Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy. Okay, that's fine. Then they release another game. Now this one's Japan only, but it comes out for a system called the Sharp X68000, and it's another version of the first game. So right now there are 4 versions of the first game, actually 5 versions of the first game, all with completely different gameplay and all on different systems. You've got, if you're a Japanese person, you've got Demon Castle Dracula on the Famicom, you've got Demon Castle Dracula on the MSX, which plays completely differently, you've got Demon Castle Dracula on the Super Famicom, and now you've got Demon Castle Dracula on the X68000, and they're all different. What's up with that? Then comes Dracula X, Chino Rondo, or what we call it in America, Dracula X Rondo of Blood. Now this is a weird one because it comes out for a system called the PC Engine in Japan. Now it never came out here, but if you're wondering what the equivalent of the PC Engine is, it's called the Turbo Duo here. What the hell is the Turbo Duo? Well, remember how Sega Genesis had the add-on, the Sega CD? And you remember that there was a third 16-bit console called the fucking TurboGrafx 16? Yeah, probably not. It didn't last very long because it wasn't very good. Well, that actually had a CD add-on called the Turbo Duo that they called the PC Engine over there. And that Castlevania game, which was supposedly one of the best ones, came out for that system. I mean, what the hell? So even if I was into buying Japanese games that don't come out here, I would have to have the Turbo Duo. And that's assuming that the fucking thing is region-free. Well then, I mean, alright. So then they go to Castlevania Bloodlines. Now what the hell? This one is on the Genesis. So first they do one on the Super NES, and then they do one on the Genesis, a completely different game. Now I realize why they did Castlevania Bloodlines on the Genesis, because they wanted to make it kind of a bloodier, gorier game, and Nintendo wasn't having that. But the thing is, they did make a sanitized version of Castlevania Bloodlines to be released in the European market. So I don't understand. That was called Castlevania The New Generation. I don't understand why that version couldn't be ported over to the Super NES. What the hell? Then comes Castlevania Dracula X, which is sort of a remake of Chino Rondo. That comes out on the Super NES. So first we have one for the Super Nintendo, then the Genesis, and then back to the Super Nintendo. Which is the Castlevania system? There's 2 games on the Super Nintendo, and one on the fucking Genesis, and one on the Turbo Duo, which only came out in Japan. That's 3, that's one generation, and that spans 3 systems. There's no reason to do that. All of those games could have been on one system. Well, maybe not Chino Rondo, but I mean, they could have sanitized it a little bit better, and they could have dumbed it down a little better. Castlevania Dracula X is really kind of a separate game. Alright, moving along, the next game that comes out is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. That comes out on Sony's PlayStation. Okay, that's fine. It actually came out really early in the PlayStation's library, before the Nintendo 64 was even really catching on. So we knew to get, if you wanted the Castlevania games, you would go to the PlayStation. And Castlevania Symphony of the Night really kicks your ass. I mean, this game is awesome. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just one of those perfect games that I could play forever. As a matter of fact, they never really did a sequel. I mean, they could have released basically the same game with a few minor tweaks and a new map and new music, and I would have been happy. I would have been thrilled. They later released it for the Sega Saturn, but only in Japan. Now, what bugs me about this is they added 2 new areas, 2 new bosses, and, which basically means 4 new areas because there's 2 castles, and the ability to play as Maria and the ability to play as Richter without having to beat the game. So why wasn't that in the PlayStation version? Then they go to Castlevania Legends. Okay, that's on the Game Boy, and if you're a fan of the series, you already had the first 2 Game Boy games, so that makes sense. Then comes a game that's simply called Castlevania. They released this one on the Nintendo 64. Now wait a minute, I thought the PlayStation was where it's at. Why is this one on the Nintendo 64? And why is it just called Castlevania? In Japan, it's called Demon Castle Dracula Apocalypse. So why shouldn't it be called Castlevania Apocalypse? The hell is up with that? And then they talk about another game called Castlevania 2 that came out in the same year. They eventually decided to call it Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Now, I actually like the first N64 Castlevania, but what pisses me off about the second one is that it basically was what the first game should have been. It wasn't a completely different game. It was the same game with 2 extra characters and some extra levels. So what the hell? Why did they do that? Then comes Castlevania Chronicles. Now, when I heard about this, I was excited because it sounds like it's going to be like Final Fantasy Chronicles, where it's a couple of the old games that maybe you didn't get to play. This came out on the PlayStation, so now we're back to PlayStation? I thought we were on the N64 now. Now, this was actually a remake of the X68000 game. Well, at least we got to play it. Then comes Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Now, here the series kind of, it kind of stabilized here. It was the right kind of game. It was like Symphony of the Night, and it was on Game Boy Advance. I have no problem with that. And the next 2 games, Harmony of Dissonance and Aria of Sorrow, were also on the Game Boy Advance. Then they go for Castlevania Lament of Innocence. This came out on the PlayStation 2. Alright, so they're back on the PlayStation 2. That's fine. But then comes another game, this time on the Nintendo DS. Dawn of Sorrow. Okay, and then they release another PlayStation 2 game, Castlevania Curse of Darkness, although this one's also on the Xbox. Well, why wasn't the first one on the Xbox? And how come neither of them are on the GameCube? Now, it seems there's two series, the 3D series and the 2D series. The 2D series moves over to the DS, with two games so far, Dawn of Sorrow and Portrait of Ruin, and there's a third one coming out. But there's another handheld Castlevania, a remake of Chino Rondo. Is it for the DS? No, it's for the fucking PSP. Why? Why do they do this? And now we got a fighting game coming out for the Wii. Why the Wii? I mean, I got no problem with the Wii, but you just know that the next game is going to be for like 360 or something. In conclusion, the series jumps around way too much. They could have kept it more concise, and you have to buy way too many systems to play them all. Hopefully, they'll learn from this in the future, but I don't see it happening.